Okay, so this is the Master Therion. This is Aleister Crowley's interpretation of his tarot cards, and we've gotten through quite a bit of it today. And we're just moving on to the explanation of the cards themselves, but at this point he's been explaining gematria, numerology, the Golden Dawn, as well as a bunch of other occult, symbolic, iconographic information, and that's it. And it's an absolutely fabulous book. I remember the first time I read it, I was blown away because every everything the way we communicate is essentially based off of ancient communications, and a lot of this has to do with the development of the mind, with different with all the generations, and this is essentially a different way of communicating with the universe, so to speak, the universe patterns, and this is the tarot, which backwards means rota, which is the wheel, and this differs from Judaistic Kabbalah. Supposedly, this is a little different than Zohar, and this. He's describing Sephiroth, but he's also saying that this is a different. This is different because this comes from Crowley, so he views this as being the divine, not instructions, but his communications with what he calls the secret chiefs. But again, he's just borrowing from Kabbalah here, and the way he explains Kabbalah makes it very easy to understand. He simplifies it. And in some ways, you could say that Crowley attempts to summarize and then, I don't know, reform religion in many ways by taking ownership of it. So let's begin the reading. This is going to be for like 30 minutes straight. See how many pages we can get through, and then I'll thank you for joining me. So if you want to invite anybody, feel free. If you have any questions at the end, please hold them to the end and we can discuss it. So we're live on Philosophy Audiobook, Tarot Cards Now, Chicago Pizza Parlor, Audio Teachers, and we are filming this. We're starting on page 34 of the Master Therion. This is called the Tarot and the Tree of Life. The tarot, while based on these theoretical attributions, was designed as a practical instrument for Kabbalistic calculations and for divination. In it is little place for abstract ideas. The subject of the book, the tarot, is called the Book of Thoth, or Tahuti, is the influence of the 10 numbers of the 22 letters on man, and his best methods of manipulating the forces. There is therefore no mention of the 3 veils of the negative, which was discussed in the description of the Tree of Life. The description begins with the small cards numbered 1 to 10. These are divided into 4 suits according to the 4 elements. Thus the Ace of Wands is called the root of the forces of fire. It pertains to Kether and purports to represent the first positive manifestation of the idea of fire. The 2 pertains to Kokma, but here is already no more the simplicity of the idea of fire. An idea in action or in manifestation is no more the pure idea. The card is attributed to the first decan of the fiery sign Aries, which is ruled by Mars. This then gives the idea of a violent and aggressive force. The card is therefore called the Lord of Dominion. This progressive degradation of the idea of fire goes on increasing through the suit. Each successive card becomes less ideal and more actual, increasingly so until, with the number 6, which corresponds to the sun, the center of the whole system, the fiery idea resurges, balanced, hence pure, although complex. Beyond this, the force is beginning to expand itself or to spiritualize itself in the cards of the Deacon of Sagittarius. But the best fixation of the fiery force is found in the 9, which number is the foundation of the structure of the Tree of Life. Thus the card is called the Lord of Strength. The fire has been purified, etherealized, and balanced, but in the 10, showing complete materialization and nimiety. The effect of fire is pushed to its extreme limit. Its death is impending, but it reacts against this as best it can by appearing as the lord of oppression, formidable on the surface, but with the seeds of decay already sprouting. The above summary can easily be applied by the student to the other suits. The court cards are 16 in number, 4 to each suit. There is thus a subdivision of each element into its own system. The knights represent the element of fire, so that Knight of Wands represents the fiery part of fire. The Knight of Cups, the fiery part of water. Similarly, the Princess or Empress represent earth, so that the Empress of Discs, Coins, or Pentacles represents the earthy part of earth. These cards have many manifestations in natural phenomena. Thus, the Knight of Wands has the attribution of Aries and represents swift violence of onset. The lightning flash. But the airy part of fire is sympathetic with Leo, the steady force of energy, the sun, lastly, in the watery part of fire. The harmony is with Sagittarius. Thus, the Knight of Wands has the attribution of Aries and represents swift violence of onset, the lightning flash. But the airy part of fire is sympathetic with Leo, the steady force of energy, the sun, lastly, in the watery part of fire. The harmony is with Sagittarius, which shows the fading, spiritualized reflection or translucence of the image of fire, and this suggests the rainbow. See table of the triplicities of the zodiac. The Atu of Tahuti. Subnote 1. Atu, house or key, in ancient Egyptian. Tahuti, Egyptian god of wisdom, magic, science, also illusion. In Coptic, Thoth in Greek, Hermes in Latin, Mercury. The Hindu and Scandinavian gods corresponding are debased forms. 22 is the number of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the number of the paths of the Sefer Yetzirah. These paths are the paths which join the 10 numbers on the figure called the Tree of Life. Why are there 22 of them? Because that is the number of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and one letter goes to each path. Why should this be so? Why should these paths be arranged in the tree in the way that the diagram shows? Why should there not be paths connecting the numbers 2 and 5 and the numbers 3 and 4? One cannot answer any of these questions. Who knows how A got leave on ox to B? No camel, quoth the Jews, like G. Browning. One knows only that this was the conventional arrangement adopted by whoever it was that devised the tarot. What is worse, it seems very confusing, very annoying. It shakes one's faith in these great sages. But at least there is no doubt that this is so. The letters of the Hebrew alphabet are 22. There are 3 mother letters for the elements, 7 double letters for the planets, and 12 single letters for the signs of the zodiac. There are 4 elements, not 3, or including the element of spirit, an important matter to initiates, there are 5. There are, therefore, 2 letters of the alphabet which have to do double duty. The element of fire is very close kin to the idea of spirit, so the letter Shin belonging to fire may be taken to mean spirit as well. There is a special reason why this should be so, although it only applies in latter ages. Since the introduction of the dogma that spirit rules the 4 elements and the formation of the pentagram of salvation connected with the Hebrew word IHSHVH, Yahashua. With regard to earth, it was considered adequate to make the letter Tau belonging to Saturn correspond also to earth. These additions are clear evidence that the tarot took definite and arbitrary steps to assert the new discovery in magic, some 2,000 years ago, for no system is more rigid than a Hebrew system. And the system of the Sefer Yetzirah is the deepest rooted of all the elements of the Hebrew system, the most dogmatic of them all. The tarot is justified not by faith but by works. The departure from the original bone-dry Kabbalah have been justified by experience. The point raised above about the way in which the paths are selected to join certain numbers and not others is found to express important doctrines connected with the facts of initiation. It must always be borne in mind that tarot is not only an atlas for recording facts, but a guidebook showing one how to travel through these countries previously unknown. Travelers in China are somewhat bewildered at first when they are told that it is 100 li from Yangcheng to Pupeng, but only 40 li from Pupeng to Yangcheng. The answer is that the li is a measure of the time of marching, not of miles. The difference of calculation informs one that Pupeng is a long way up the hill. It is very much the same with the tarot. The Six of Wands is referred to Jupiter in Leo and called the Lord of Victory. This indicates not only what victory is like, but also the conditions to be fulfilled in order to obtain victory. There is need of the fiery energy of the suit of wands, the balance of the number 6, the stubborn courage of Leo, and also the influence of Jupiter, the little bit of luck that tips the scale. These considerations are particularly important in dealing with the Atu, or trumps. Planets are already represented in the numbers or Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, but they have also attributions to certain of the paths. Some etymologists of a singularly idle disposition have tried to derive the French word atut from the atu meaning house. It may seem simpler to suggest that atut is short for bon atut, meaning good for anything, because a trump will take any card of any suit. The Atu of Tahuti, who is the Lord of Wisdom, are also called keys. They are guides to conduct. They give you the map of the kingdom of heaven, and also the best way to take it by force. A complete understanding of any magical problem is necessary before it can be solved. Study from outside and action from outside are always abortive. It is of the utmost importance to understand this extremely specialized character of the trumps. To say that the trump, number 3, called the Empress, represents Venus, means something much less and also much more than appears if Venus be studied from a strictly astrological standpoint. One abandons the contemplation of the whole in order to take practical advice of a part. Just so, tactics differs from strategy. A different general does not think of war in the abstract, but confines his attention to a minute part of his perhaps vast knowledge of the subject by considering the disposition of his forces at a given place and time, and how best to employ them against his adversary. This is of course true not only of the trumps, but of all the other cards, and it must be true of any specialized studies. If one goes into a shop and asks for a map of a certain country, one cannot get a complete map because any such map would necessarily merge into the universe as it approaches completeness. For a country's character is modified by the adjacent countries and so on forever. Nor would even any useful map be complete in the most vulgar, practical way without leading to confusion. The shopman would want to know whether his customers wanted a geological map, an orographical map, a commercial map, a map showing the distribution of population, or a strategic map, and so on forever. The student of the tarot must not therefore expect to find anything beyond a careful selection of the facts about any given card, a selection made for quite a definite magical purpose. However, the tarot does try to resume in a simple pictorial symbol as many as possible of the useful aspects of the idea. In studying any card, one ought not to neglect any of the attributions, because each class of attribution does modify the form and color of the card and its use. This essay will endeavor in the section describing each card in turn to include as many of the correspondences as possible. The Roman number of the trumps, subnote 1. Some paragraphs of this section repeat in slightly different phrases statements already made in earlier pages. This is intended. The trumps are numbered in Roman figures in order to avoid confusion with the Arabic numbers of the Sephiroth. It has puzzled the traditional writers on the tarot that these numbers should run from 0 to 21. They seem to have thought that it would be proper to assume that 0 was the fool, because he was a cipher, a good-for-nothing. They made this assumption simply because they did not know the secret doctrine of the Kabbalistic 0. They did not know. elementary mathematics. They did not know that mathematicians began the decimal scale with 0. To make it quite clear to initiates that they did not understand the meaning of the card called the Fool, they put him down between the cards 20 and 21. For what reason it baffles the human imagination to conceive. They then attributed the card number 1, the juggler, to the letter Aleph. In this simple yet ingenious manner, they got the attribution of every card except the universe 21 wrong. Meanwhile, the true attribution was well guarded in the sanctuary. It only became public when the secret lection issued to members of the grade of Practicus of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was published as a result of the catastrophe attending the English branch of the order in 1899 and 1900, and reconstruction of the whole order in March and April of 1904 by putting the card marked 0 in its proper place. Where any mathematician would have put it, the attributions fall into a natural order which is confirmed by every investigation. There was, however, one kink in the rope. The card called Adjustment is marked number 8. The card called Lust is marked 11. To maintain the natural sequence, Lust must be attributed to Libra and Adjustment to Leo. Subnote 1. The old titles of these cards respectively Strength and Justice. They are inadequate or misleading. This is evidently wrong because the card called Adjustment actually shows a woman with a sword and scales, while the card called Lust shows a woman and a lion. It was quite impossible to understand why this reversal should have taken place until the events of March and April 1904, which are recounted in detail in the Equinox of the Gods. One need here give only one quotation. All these old letters in my book are right. But Zadi is not the star. This was making darkness deeper. It was clear that the attribution of the star to the letter Zadi was unsatisfactory, and the question arose how to find another card which would take its place. An incredible amount of work was done on this in vain. After nearly 20 years, the solution appeared. The star represents Nuit, the starry heavens. I am infinite space, and the infinite stars thereof. She is represented with 2 vases, one pouring water, symbol of light, upon herself, the other upon the earth. This is a glyph of the economy of the universe. It continually pours forth energy and continually reabsorbs it. It is the realization of perpetual motion, which is never true of any part, but necessary true of the whole, for if it were not so, there would be something disappearing into nothing, which is mathematically absurd. The principle of Carnot, the second law of thermodynamics, is only true in finite equations. The card which must be exchanged for the star is the Emperor, which bears the number 4, which signifies power, authority, law. It is attributed to the sign Aries. This proves very satisfactory. But it became infinitely more so as soon as it was seen that the substitution cleared up the other mystery about strength and justice, for Leo and Libra are by this exchange shown as revolved about Virgo, the 6th sign of the zodiac, which balances the revolution of Aries and Aquarius about Pisces. 12th sign. This is a reference to a peculiar secret of the ancients, which was very deeply studied by Godfrey Higgins and others of his school. It is useless to go far into the matter here, but the position is made clear enough by the accompanying diagram. It will be seen at a glance that now, for the first time, is a perfect symmetry established in the tarot. The justice of exchange is evident when one considers etymology. It is natural that the Great Mother should be attributed to He, which is her letter in the Tetragrammaton, while the letter Zadi is the natural letter of the Emperor in the original phonetic system as shown in the words Tsar, Tsar, Kaiser, Caesar, Senior, Senor, Senor, Signor, Sir. The Tarot and the Magic. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. In other words, it is science, pure and applied. The thesis has been worked out at great length by Dr. Sir J.G. Fraser, but in common parlance the word magic has been used to mean the kind of science which ordinary people do not understand. It is in this restricted sense, for the most part, that the word will be used in this essay. The business of science is to explore nature. Its first questions are, what is this? How did it come to be? What are its relations with any other object? The knowledge acquired may then be used in applied science, which asks how can we best employ such and such a thing or idea for the purpose that to us seems fit. An example may make this clear. The Greeks of old were aware that by rubbing amber, which they called electron, upon silk, the amber acquired the power of attracting to itself light objects, such as small pieces of paper. But there they stopped. The science was hoodwinked by theological and philosophical theories of the a priori type. It was well over 2,000 years before this phenomenon was correlated with other electrical phenomena. The idea of measurement was hardly known to anyone but mathematicians like Archimedes and astronomers. The foundations of science as it is understood today were hardly laid at all. 200 years ago, there was an immense amount of knowledge, but it was nearly all qualitative. The classification of phenomena depended chiefly upon poetic analogies. The doctrines of correspondences and signatures was based upon fanciful resemblances. Cornelius Agrippa wrote of the antipathy between a dolphin and a whirlpool. If a meretrix sat under an olive tree, it would bear no more fruit. If anything looked like something else, it partook in some mysterious way of its qualities. This sounds today to many people mere superstitious ignorance and nonsense, but it is not altogether so. The old system of classification was sometimes good and sometimes bad as far as it went, but in no case did it go very far. The natural ingenuity of the natural philosophers did compensate very largely for the weakness of their theory, and it did ultimately lead them, especially through alchemy, where they were forced by the nature of the work to add real to their ideal observation, to introduce the idea of measure. Modern science, intoxicated by the practical success which attended this innovation, has simply shut the door on anything that cannot be measured. The old guard refuses to discuss it, but the loss is immense. Obsession with strictly physical qualities has blocked out all real human values. The science of the tarot is entirely based upon this older system. The calculations involved are very precise, but they never lose sight of the incommensurable and the imponderable. The theory of animism was always present in the minds of the medieval masters. Any natural object possessed not only its material characteristics, but was a manifestation of a more or less tangible idea on which it depended. The pool was a pool, true, but also there was a nymph whose home it was. In her turn, she was dependent on a superior kind of nymph, who was much less closely attached to any given pool, but more to pools in general, and so on up to the supreme lady of water, who exercised a general supervision over her whole dominion. She, of course, was subject to the general ruler of all the four elements. It was exactly the same idea as in the case of the police constable, who was his sergeant, inspector, superintendent, commissioner, always getting more cloudy and remote until you reach the shadowy Home Secretary, who is himself the servant of a completely intangible and incalculable phantom called the will of the people. We may doubt how far the personification of these entities was conceived as real by the ancients, but the theory was that while anyone with a pair of eyes could see the pool, he could not see the nymph except by some accident. But they thought that a superior type of person, by dint of searching, study, and experiment, might acquire their general power. A person still more advanced in this science could get into real connection with the superior, because subtler forms of life. He could perhaps cause them to manifest themselves to him in material shape. A good deal of this rests upon the Platonic ideology, which maintained that any material object was an impure and imperfect copy of some ideal perfection. So men who wished to advance in spiritual science and philosophy strove always to formulate for themselves the pure idea. They tried to proceed from the particular to the general, and this principle has been of the greatest service to ordinary science. The mathematics of 6 plus 5 equals 11 and 12 plus 3 equals 15 was all in bits. Advance only came when they wrote down their equations in general terms. X to the second minus y to the second equals x plus y times x minus y. Covers all possible cases of subtracting the square of one number from the square of another. So the meaninglessness and abstract, when understood, has far more meaning than the intelligible and concrete. These considerations apply to the cards taken from the tarot, which is the meaning of the Five of Wands. What is the meaning of the Five of Wands? This card is subject to the Lord of Fire because it is a wand, and to the Sephira Gabura because it is a 5. It is also subject to the sign Leo and to the planet Saturn because this planet and sign determine the nature of the card. This is in no more than saying that a dry martini has got some juniper in it, and some alcohol, and some white wine, and herbs, and a bit of lemon peel, and some ice. It is a harmonious composition of various elements. Once mixed, it forms a single compound from which it would be very difficult to separate the ingredients. Yet each element is necessary to the composition. The Five of Wands is therefore a personality. The nature of this is summed up in the tarot by calling it strife. This means that if used passively in divination, one says when it turns up there is going to be a fight. If used actively, it means that the proper course of conduct is to contend. But there is a further point about this card. It is governed from the angelic world by two beings, one during the hours of light, the other during the hours of darkness. Therefore, in order to use the properties of this card, one way is to get into communication with the intelligence concerned and to induce him to execute his function. There are thus 72 angels set over the 36 small cards. These are derived from the great name of God, of 72 letters called Shemham Forash. The Shemham Forash and the Tarot. That's the next chapter. Okay. Take a quick little reading break. Take the deepest breath of the day. Count to 10. Please come up, ask any questions if you have any. Thanks for joining me. Please invite some people to the room. Sinmount, welcome. Zalani, Miss Queen. I'm going to share this on my Twitter before I forget. And if you want a tarot card reading after this is over, I'd be happy to do that for you. It's $9,999 in spiritual cryptocurrency. So who is Acrylic Flood? Because you're getting tweeted at right now. So this reading will go for like 10 more minutes. Apparently nobody wants to come up. From above to below, below to above. I'm going to share this. And the last thing I'm going to do is pin a link. Let's see here. Oh. Get you a Aleister Crowley video. Okay. Now let's finish this reading. The Shemham Farash and the Tarot. This word means the divided name. The name is Tetragrammaton, IHVH, commonly called Jehovah. He is the supreme lord of the four elements which compose fundamentally the whole universe. There are 3 verses in Exodus, each containing 72 letters. By writing down the first of these, and underneath this the next verse backwards, and under this again the last verse forwards, 72 columns of 3 letters each are obtained. These are read downwards, and the terminations AL or AH, according as they are male or female appended. There is also an attribution of these intelligences, one to each of the quinaries or segments of 5 degrees of the zodiac. But there are also innumerable other angels, demons, magical images, lords of triplicities, lesser assistant angels, and so on, with demons to correspond. It is quite useless to study all these attributions. They could only be wanted in case of wishing to get into actual communication with one of them for some special purpose. These matters are here mentioned for the sake of completeness, but the tarot will lose all its vitality for one who allows himself to be sidetracked by its pedantry. The tarot and the ceremonial magic. The tarot is thus intimately bound up with the purely magical arts of invocation and evocation. By invocation is meant the aspiration to the highest, the purest form of the part of oneself that one wishes to put into action. Evocation is much more objective. It does not imply perfect sympathy. One's attitude to the being evoked may even be at least superficially hostile. Then, of course, the further advanced one is in initiation, the less the idea of hostility enters one's mind. Tent compendere siest taut ordinaire. Thus, in order to understand any given card, one must identify with oneself with it completely for the moment. And one way of doing this is to induce or compel the intelligence ruling the card to manifest to the senses. For as explained above, the ancient theory of the universe included the thesis that every object in nature possessed a spiritual guardian. Roughly speaking, this did not apply so much to manufactured objects, though there are exceptions to this, as in the case of the gods of the hearth and the lintel and the like, or of angels or spirits as supposed to be interested in one's sword or one's spear. A particularly powerful weapon was likely to get the reputation of not having been manufactured at all by human hands, but forged in volcanoes or in fairyland, and thus imbued with preternatural powers. Some famous swords had names and were regarded as living beings. They were liable to fly out of the window if the owner played about too much instead of killing people as is proper. This is called the tarot of the Egyptians, the tarot and animism. It is only natural, therefore, that at a time when pictorial or written representations of ideas were beyond the comprehension of any but a very few people, when writing itself was considered magical and printing as it is an invention of the devil, people should regard hieroglyphs, whether written or pictured, as living things having power in themselves. It may be that even today there are houses in darkest Shropshire where anyone who put another book on the top of the family Bible would be told never to darken those doors again. Automatic action is everywhere ascribed to inanimate objects, for instance, horseshoes on doors. There is an entire class of such superstitions. The problem of how any given superstition arose has not always been satisfactorily solved. One can ignorantly derive the sitting down 13 at table nonsense from the legend of the Last Supper. Incidentally, it can hardly have been the first time that those 13 sat down to table. But the really primitive superstitions cannot be explained so simply. It seems more probable that they arose from the unscientific habit, extremely common among men of science, of generalizing from too few facts. It might happen by chance that on half a dozen occasions within a short period, a hunter setting out at full moon was killed. The old fallacy of post hoc propter hoc would come in, and the village would say it is unlucky to go out hunting at full moon. This would gather force as it was repeated through the generations by virtue of mental indolence, and it could not be disturbed because taboo would render the original coincidence unlikely to recur. If, however, something similar came off at the new moon, there would be a new superstition, and presently there would be a complete nexus of the taboo about the moon. A recent case, the late Mr. S. L. Mellers published in 1898 to 1889 the translation of a manuscript called The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. In a small private edition, some hundreds of people bought it. One special group of purchasers, under his personal observation, were all or nearly hit by misfortune. Within a year, people were saying that it was terribly dangerous to have the book on one's shelves. Would this theory have resisted statistical examination? Who can say? But curiously enough, in 1938, a neglected copy was taken from its hiding place on an obscure shelf. Immediately, disasters occurred to most of the people concerned and to those with whom they were in close relationship. Post hoc, propter hoc. But who could be sure? The cards of the tarot as living beings, Victorian science, flushed with its victory over supernaturalism, was quite right to declare the immeasurable out of bounds. It had a right to do so on technical grounds, and it was a strategical necessity of its offensive. But it hampered itself by limiting its scope. It laid itself open to the deadliest attacks from philosophy. Then, especially from the angle of mathematical physics, its own generals betrayed its dogmatism. The essence of science today is far more mysterious than the cloudiest speculations of Leibniz, Spinoza, or Hegel. The modern definition of matter reminds one irresistibly of the definitions of spirit given by such mystics as Roy Sbrock, Bohm, and Molinos. The idea of the universe in the mind of a modern mathematician is singularly reminiscent of the ravings of William Blake. But the mystics were all wrong when they were pious and held that the mysteries were too sacred to analyze. They ought to have brought in the idea of measure. This is exactly what was done by the magicians and Kabbalists. The difficulty has been that the units of measurement have themselves been somewhat elastic. They even tend to be literary. The definitions were as circular as, but not more fugitive than, the definitions of the physicists of today. The methods were empirical, though they strove to make them accurate, as well as lack of precise measures and standard apparatus permitted because they had not yet formulated any true scientific theory. But their successes were numerous, all dependent on individual skill. One would rather trust oneself in illness to the born physician than to the laboratory experts of Battle Creek. One of the great differences between ancient and modern chemistry is the idea of the alchemists that suggest that substance in its natural state is in some way or other a living thing. The modern tendency is to insist on the measurable. One can go into a museum and see rows of glass globes and bottles which contain the chemical substances which go to make up the human body. But the collection is very far from being a man. Still less does it explain the difference between Lord Tom Noddy and Bill Sykes. 19th century chemists were at great pains to analyze opium and isolate its alkaloids, rather like a child pulling a watch to piece to see what makes it go. They succeeded, but the results were not altogether wholesome. Morphine has much more direct hypnotic effect than opium. Its action is speedier and more violent, but it is also a very dangerous drug, and its effects are often disastrous. The action of morphine is sensibly modified by the other 20-odd alkaloids which exist in opium. The intoxicating effect of alcohol differs according to whether one absorbs it in Reichsborg 29 or in synthetic gin. An even more startling example comes from Venezuela, where running messengers chew cocoa leaves covered their 100 miles a day and sleep till they are rested. They have no bad reaction and they do not acquire the habit. Cocaine is a different story. The adepts of the tarot would say quite simply, we are alive and the plant is alive, so we can make friends. If you kill the plant first, you are asking for trouble. All this is here written in defense of the system of the makers and users of the tarot, of the methods of dealing with nature, of making experiments without undue attention to the wish to get things done quickly. They would expose a mixture to the rays of the sun or moon for weeks and months, thinking that everything would be spoilt if they boiled it up violently. The process of nature, they would say, are slow and temperate. Let us copy them. There may have been good grounds for these views. Experience leads to that conclusion. This is by way of introduction to a thesis most necessary to the understanding of the tarot. Each card is in a sense a living being, and its relations with its neighbors are what one might call diplomatic. It is for the student to build these living stones into his living temple. Part 2, the Atu, keys or trumps. We see a picture of the card Lust. So it goes straight into the Fool, which is chapter 2. And be happy to read that to you, but we're at 40 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to contrast this read with Zohar. And Stephen, thank you for joining me. Miss Queen, Alan Till, welcome. Stephen, come on up. I'm about to read you Zohar for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to the gym. And I'm going swimming, and I'm going to get in the hot tub. Hot tub time machine. Okay, so should I read you this? This is called The Opium Smoker in 8 Fugues by Aleister Crowley. To Elaine Simpson. This is the 100th Monkey Press, copyright 2013. When a critical mass is achieved within a species, the behavior is instantaneously transferred to and exhibited by all members of the species. I like that quote. I think it makes sense. It's about universal consciousness, or just consciousness. I mean, the internet has changed everything. Number 1, crown me with poppy leaves. See are the bays. Fling down the metal decays. Still be the strife of the strenuous days. Still be thy stridency, player Pandine. Soothe me the lute, but oh hush to the pain. Feed me on kisses of flowers Lethiane. Specks on the wheel of the nights and the days, fast as they fall from me, lost in the haze, sobered to softness of silver greys. Satan is fallen from the pale Empyrean, down in the dusk with the dead Galilean. Fill me the cup of poppy Circean, hardly a glimmer to chasten the gloom, hardly a murmur of time at his loom, nothing of sense but the poppy perfume. Boy, as you love me, I charge you to fold pipe over pipe into gardens of gold, such as a god may be glad to behold. Seated on high in the eons of doom, sucked as a seed to the infinite womb, sealed in my soul in the sheath of its tomb. Boy, as you love me, I charge you to mold pipe after pipe till the heavens are rolled back and are lost as a tale that is told. Silence and darkness weaving a web, broidered with nothing at uttermost ebb. Cover, oh cover the shaming of Seb. Fling the wide veil who knew it on the shame. Shame from the knowledge and unto the name. Hide it, oh hide it in flowers of flame. Now, in the balance of infinite things, stirs not a feather, the universe swings, poised on the stealth of ineffable wings. Surely the sable Osirian bird, soul in the ether, shall utter the word, now that its crying can never be heard. See how the star of the universe blazes, millions of meteors and marvelous mazes mingle the magic of peonic praises. Oh, the dark streak in the heart of its flood, smitten is the star in its poisonous blood, drips through the race of luminous scud. Poison and poison and poison, I quiver, drenched with the hate of the horrible river. Oh, but the stars of it stagger and shiver. Leave me in peace, O disaster of light. Leave me to solitude, leave me tonight. Is there no moon to enkindle the height? See how the moon with her Amitra dews drinks up the death of the star and renews life in cascades of Pyrrhean hues. Nay, but she curves to arise, to increase, glamour on glamour to sicken and cease. How shall the warrior win to the peace? Fade, O thou moon, in thy magical bark. Sink in the ocean thy silvery spark. Leave me, leave me alone in the dark. Art thou not burnt in the fire of my will? See by the flashes that crimson and kill, I am the master, the magic is still. See how the wrath of my ruin that I send her, fire of my fire, is flung flying to end her, wrapping in ruin the scintillant splendor. Fire of my fire, how the brilliance darts forth, runs to the uttermost pole of the north, splashing all space with the spume of my wrath. Ah, but the subtle, the perilous way that hath no fire to enkindle the clay, ever to all be the work of me, nay. I, who am being in knowledge and bliss, lacked by so much of the utter abyss, bring me, oh bring me, oh bring me to this. Nay, it is over, I may not attain. Why am I faint? But because I am fain, or roll me the rapture of amber again. Ah, but the poppy's decidus dream may not avail me to stand to the stream, bearing me back from the mighty extreme. Subtle and sombre, the eager of sleep, rose up the bay to envelop the steep. What then is left, what is left but to weep? Maybe the stridency purpled of Pan leads at the last to the light of his plan. Maybe his work is the wealth of a man. Bring me the tablets, stylus of jade. Lend me thy light, O compassionate maid. Soul of the master, O come to mine aid. Make me the man of the marvelous mission. Sharpen the sword of vertical vision. Cut me the knot of the mighty magician. Here I devote me, record me the vow unto the terrible task of the Tao. Soul of the master, the writer be thou. Bring me the tablets and stylus, have done. Guard me the doors, they are open to none. Not to the emperor I have begun. Okay, that's called The Opium Smoker and 8 Fugues by Aleister Crowley. And we'll top it off with a little Zohar. Doc is left. Okay, we're nearing the conclusion of tonight's reading. We're at 46 minutes and 44 seconds. This is Tarot Cards Now, Philosophy Audiobook. And audio teachers. Okay, this is called The Gift of the Dwelling. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and have them take me a gift. From everyone whose heart moves him, take my gift. This is the gift that you shall take from them. Gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarn, fine linen and goat's hair, rams' skins dyed red, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the oil of anointing and for aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and precious setting stones for the ephod and the breastpiece. Have them make me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Yossi were sitting one day beneath some trees in the plain by the sea of Ginosar. Rabbi Shimon said, The shade spread over us by these trees is so pleasant, we must crown this place with words of Torah. Rabbi Shimon opened and said, King Solomon made himself a palanquin out of the cedars of Lebanon. We have already established the meaning of the verse, but the palanquin is the palace below, which is like the palace on high. The Blessed Holy One calls it Garden of Eden, for he planted it for his pleasure and his yearning to delight in the souls of the righteous, who are all enrolled within. These are souls who have no body in this world. They all ascend. There they are crowned. They have places from which to gaze, to enjoy the joy on high called the light of Yahweh. There they are filled by precious flows of rivers of pure balsam. One who attains the palanquin is entitled to everything. He is worthy of sitting in the comfort of the shade of the Blessed Holy One, as it is said, I delight to sit in his shade. Now that we are sitting in this shade of comfort, we should be aware that we are sitting in the shade of the Blessed Holy One within the palanquin. We should crown this place with crowns so high that the trees of the palanquin will be swayed, to cover us with another shade. Happy is